Ken Griffey Jr. was a professional baseball player and a very good one. A couple of years ago, he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is the biggest honor that any professional baseball player can ever be given. And in his Hall of Fame speech, he admitted something about himself that gives him something in common with a number of people, with Halle Berry, Princess Diana, Tina Turner, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Pryor, Walt Disney, Billy Joel, Clark Gable, Fantasia, Sammy Davis Jr., Drew Carey, Vanilla Ice, Nell Carter, and Gary Coleman, among many others. And do you know what that is? They all tried to commit suicide at least once. They all at one point came to the conclusion that it might not be worth it to keep going. I don't know if you've ever considered suicide, but you don't have to be suicidal to ever wonder the same thing. And if you ever have, if you've ever looked into your future and wondered if you would have the strength or the energy or the desire to face whatever you believe is coming, I want you to know that you're not alone. There's someone else who knows how you feel. And I'm not talking about Ken Griffey Jr. I'm talking about Jesus. He wasn't suicidal, but thoughts about the future filled him with anxiety too, and so much anxiety that it literally caused him to sweat drops of blood while he begged his Father in heaven to put him on a path that was different than the one he knew was coming. In Luke chapter 22, Jesus says this, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Even Jesus knew what it was like to feel anguish. Even Jesus felt weak. Even Jesus needed to be strengthened, and the reason he did was because he knew exactly what was coming. It was a cross. It was some nails. It was the weight of the world's sins. It was our only shot at heaven, which is why our Father in heaven answered his prayer with a very definitive no. He said no to Jesus' request to take all of his pain away because he clearly wanted to say yes to one day taking away all of yours, so that you could live each day knowing that God chooses you. He chooses to stay by your side through anything. I know life doesn't always make you feel that way, which is why I'm glad you're here with me this week. We'll remind one another that our God is the one who always gives us good reasons to keep going. Dustin and Sierra were expecting a baby boy. They were going to name him Bentley. But shortly after they found out they were expecting, during one of the exams, the doctor told them that there was something wrong with the baby inside her womb. Bentley had something called Encephalocele, which is a very rare condition in which the baby's brain is growing on the outside of the skull. The doctors told him that there was no way to address it while the baby was in the womb or after the baby came outside of the womb, and even worse, they told him that there was no way that a child could live outside of the womb with this condition. And so when Bentley was born, the nurses, they didn't bathe him, they didn't weigh him, they didn't do anything. In fact, Dustin and Sierra didn't even buy any baby supplies for their baby, except for just one thing, one little onesie that they were going to bury their baby boy in. But when Bentley was born, he didn't die. He kept living. The doctors told him not to get too optimistic, that this wasn't going to go on for very long, but Bentley kept on living for a couple of months until Dustin and Sierra met a doctor named Dr. Mira, who told them something that so far no one had told them up to that point, that there was a way for Bentley to keep on living. Dr. Mira had invented a surgery in which he would cut open the baby's skull and peel those pieces back like the petals of a flower, and then take the brain that was outside the skull, reposition it inside, and then tie everything back together again and close everything up real nicely once that was done. And that's what he did. And because he did, you know what happened? Bentley lived. And he's still living. He's doing fine. Dustin and Sierra and Bentley had no ability to control anything, and yet they ended up with everything for which they were hoping. There are so many things in life that can make us feel like Dustin and Sierra did as they were waiting for that surgery to happen. And God knows how hard those moments are. Remember that there was a day when God had to wait too. A day when it didn't look like anything good could ever really happen. A day when God was holding nothing in his hands and wearing nothing on his back except the sins of a whole world that needed to be paid for and forgiven. A day when God allowed the vulnerable parts of his skin to be sliced open so that we who get so worried that our lives will not end well or afraid that they don't mean anything could see exactly how much our lives mean to God and live with the truth that nothing in all creation is going to stop us from one day experiencing the best ending of all, when God will wipe every tear away in heaven. And that's not the only truth we get to live with as Christians. There's also the truth that Jesus shares with us in Matthew chapter 6, that we don't need to worry about anything, that if God cares so perfectly for the birds of the air and the grass of the field, how much more is he going to provide everything that is needed for the crown of his creation? And then there's the truth we find in Romans chapter 8, that all things in life, even the things that don't quite go the way that you were expecting, are working together with God for your good. And if that's true, that our lives are going to end well, that we'll always have everything we need, and that everything in life is always working together for your benefit, you know what that means? It means you don't need to spend one more moment worrying about whether or not you may one day love a version of life that you may never gain. You can simply eat, drink, and work today, loving the life that you've already been given. That's what Solomon means in the book of Ecclesiastes when he says this, that there's nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in your work. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? Enjoyment. A gift from the hand of God, who in Christ Jesus has already given us everything. Jimmy has cancer. On September 11th, 2001, he was one of the many firefighters who exhausted himself rescuing and recovering and uncovering so many bodies in Manhattan on the day of the World Trade Center attacks. Did you know that more than 2,500 of those rescue workers have now been diagnosed with cancer? Jimmy is one of them. It's been scientifically proven that those rescue workers who were there just determined to rescue so many people that day are far more likely than the average person to develop cancer because of all the stuff that they were exposed to from the falling buildings. They were just trying to save people, and they ended up being trapped by something that's really difficult to escape from. That makes me think of Jonah in the Bible. Not in the sense that he was really eager to save anyone. He in fact didn't want to save anyone in the city of Nineveh. God kind of forced him to do that. But in the sense that he knew what it was like to feel trapped in ways that not everybody can understand. In Jonah Chapter 2, Jonah described where he was in life after he had been thrown into the water and before the big fish swallowed him. He said this, "The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord." That was part of a prayer that Jonah offered while he was sitting in the belly of the fish, and that prayer has basically two parts. There's the part in which Jonah thanks God for rescuing him, and then there's the part in which Jonah recalls the details of what it felt like to be trapped in the ocean. And maybe you also know how it feels to be trapped by something difficult and painful in life. Maybe that's sometimes one of the reasons that it's so difficult to move forward in life with joy and confidence. And if that's the case, then I want you to do something. I want you to take Jonah's words and put them into the mouth of Jesus. And then you basically hear Jesus giving a description of what it was like to hang on his cross during his crucifixion. My life was ebbing away. The currents of death were swirling around me. But unlike Jonah, when Jesus cried out for help, no one answered. No one came. Heaven looked and saw the only person to never run away from God's will and just silently watched as the seaweed of our sin wrapped itself around his heart and pulled him to a depth that no one had ever come back from. Just so you and I and every other person who's ever felt trapped by life or by trouble or by sadness or by sin could look at his empty Easter morning grave and find a grace that's just for them, a promise that no matter where you are, no matter where you've been, no matter how far you've run from God, no matter the depths to which you've fallen, God can still reach you. And he will. He will. Even in the depths of the sea, even in the belly of a fish, even in, well, where are you when you feel most helpless? Whatever it is, it's a place where you don't have to feel hopeless. Salvation comes from the Lord, Jonah said later on in chapter 2, and that wasn't a wish. It's a fact. It's a promise. Dennis was a huge Red Sox fan. You may remember that back in 2004, the Boston Red Sox baseball team came back from a 0-3 deficit against the New York Yankees, their heated rival, in a playoff series, the winner of whom would go on to play in the World Series. And Dennis ended up getting tickets to Game 7 of that series, the final clinching game, which was in the city of Boston. And after the Red Sox won 4 games in a row to eliminate their big rival, the Yankees, the Red Sox players, they didn't leave the field. They stayed on the field and they continued to celebrate for a very, very long time with all the fans who were there, including Dennis. The players would go around and they were high-fiving and fist-bumping all the different fans who were there because they were so excited about what was going to happen. Dennis ended up watching the Red Sox win the World Series that year from a tent in Iraq. He's a soldier. And just a couple of days after the Red Sox won that World Series, Dennis was killed. Not by a bullet, not by an explosion, but by a drunk driver as he was driving on his way back to his base. That just crushed his family. His father especially. He had a very hard time with it, and he had such a hard time with it for so long that one day his father asked God, just on a whim, for a sign. He wanted a sign from his son that he was doing okay, that it was going to be all right. A couple of days later, his dad was driving down Yawkey Way, which is a street that goes right next to Fenway Park, the stadium where the Red Sox play their baseball games, and he looked up and he saw his son on a billboard. It was a picture of him knocking knuckles with one of the Red Sox players. There was a picture that was taken that day at Game 7, the game that he attended. His dad asked for a sign, and he got one. Literally. I don't know if you've ever felt the need to ask God for a sign that you're going to be okay, but did you know that in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus gives you one? Some people were around Jesus and they were asking him for a sign, for some kind of proof that he was worth believing in, and this is what he said. He said, "But none, no sign, will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." So the sign he pointed them to was his own resurrection. He wanted them and you and me to see its significance. Those 3 days in the grave were a sign that even God knows what it's like to live in a world where it sometimes looks like all your hope has disappeared. Even God knows what it's like to hurt. Even God knows what it's like to die. But then Easter came, when God gave us a very clear sign that whatever fills your heart with pain, whatever temptations snag you just a little bit too often, one day God will raise you above it, and you will overcome it, because we have a God who will not allow even his own death to stop it from happening. I'm going to contrast 2 women, and you may have heard of the first. Her name is Brittany. Brittany lived in California, and when she was 29 years old, she was diagnosed with brain cancer and given 14 months to live. When the doctors told her that it was going to be a very painful 14 months physically, she decided to do something. She and her husband decided to move from California to Oregon because Oregon has law that California doesn't. It's called the Death with Dignity Act. It's a law that allows you to take a medication that ends your life without any pain. And that's what Brittany did. The second woman is Ashley. Ashley was also diagnosed with cancer, and doctors told her that she would have a very good chance of beating it if she started her treatment immediately, but she said no. She said no because at the time she was 10 weeks pregnant, and the doctors told her that in order to start the treatment she would have to terminate the pregnancy, and that's something that Ashley was not willing to do. She said, "How could I end the life of a healthy baby just because I'm sick?" And so she carried the baby without going through any kind of treatment for 8 months, which is when they delivered the child because things were getting pretty serious with her cancer. And they delivered the child, and the baby was healthy. The baby lived cancer-free, and the baby still is healthy and still alive. Ashley started treatment immediately after she delivered the baby, but it was too late. Ashley died. Just like Jesus did, when he could have avoided the pain of life altogether and just stayed in heaven. But he didn't. Jesus died. But like Ashley, it wasn't suicide. It was somebody choosing to love somebody else's life so much more than he loved his own, believing that it would be far better for him to die in pain than it would be to live without you forgiven. At the cross of Jesus, the God who came not to be served, but only to serve, showed us how clearly God believes that his existence is only complete with you next to him. And why? Because he carefully knit you together in your mother's womb. Because longer than you've been alive, he's been thinking of you and loving you, and not just you. That's the real tragedy when somebody chooses to die with dignity. They could have lived with confidence, this confidence, that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing will be able to cause us from missing out on heaven, where God will wipe every painful tear from our existence. They could have lived knowing that no matter how unfair life sometimes is, no matter how much God ever asks you to carry or to give, it's going to be okay. You always have a reason to keep going because the hands holding your life are His.